Welcome to What Your GP Doesn't Tell You, the podcast for both doctors and patients with me, Liz Tucker. In this week's episode, I'm talking to GP Dr Safia Debar, who discusses how we can leverage emerging knowledge of neuroscience to help us more effectively manage our stress. This is something she has deep personal knowledge of, after finding herself burnt out as a GP and then turning to her initial degree in neuroscience to see if it might help her rethink her approach. Safia argues it's not so much the stress that we face, but how we think about that stress and the processes that we put in place to manage it. It's now implicated in almost every disease you can think of, and intriguing new research suggests that calming techniques don't just affect the mind, but can create genuine biological change, switching our genes on and off. But before we get to Safia's interview, a brief request from me. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to leave a review on Spotify or Apple, that would be much appreciated. It really helps. You can also become a paid supporter of the podcast at patreon.com/whatyourgpdoesn'ttell or via PayPal on my website, whatyourgpdoesn'ttellyou.com. A huge amount of work goes into both the research and production of this podcast, so even a small amount of money makes a huge difference. And you can find out more information about the pod on my website, where you can sign up for the podcast mailing list, follow me on Twitter at LizCTucker, and on my Substack account, liz.tucker.substack.com. Many thanks. And now back to Safia's interview. Dr. Safia Debar is a GP with a particular passion for the neuroscience of stress and wellness, and incorporates stress management into her clinical practice. Her first degree was in neuroscience, and she then graduated from St George's University of London with distinction. She completed her general practice training at Chelsea and Westminster and Charing Cross hospitals, and has practiced in paediatrics, general medicine, obstetrics and gynecology, and emergency medicine. Here's Safia's interview. So Safia, thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
You're very welcome. It's an honor.
Now, Safia, your story really starts when you burnt out yourself as a GP.
Yes.
Can you explain what happened?
Yeah, I think it's really in retrospect that I say burnout, but I think I was totally unaware. I didn't know it was burnout at the time. It was the system I was working in, and I just basically found myself starting to resent the passion, the vocation that gave me so much joy and growth and career satisfaction. And when the tables started to turn, and obviously my health was also involved, and I think that then sent me into a journey. I almost went full circle because my first degree was actually in neuroscience, but what you know and what you embed is different at the time. But that's really when my journey started, with finding out about the neuroscience of stress and kind of starting to put two and two together.
So it's ironic, really, when you started to get stressed as a doctor, you didn't recognize it in yourself.
Yes. When I trained, it was a badge of honor to be able to do a 72-hour on-call on no sleep. Obviously, the nature of medical training, I mean, it's not to take away from the fact that it has to be intense, it has to be repetitive, there has to be exposure. So my issue is not with the stress, you're not given the tools.
And actually, you do see these tragic stories of suicides from young doctors unable to cope.
100%, because you feel completely alone, and you're meant to be able to be the healer. There's nothing spoken about compassion fatigue. A lot of the burnout studies come from doctors. We have some of the highest rates of stress and burnout, and it's totally normalized. It's almost like you can't be a good doctor unless you're burnt out. You know, it's almost like burnout means that you are doing a good job. So it's not only about the individual and making sure that they are optimized to manage, almost to befriend stress, because it can be our superpower. And I talk about this a lot. And it's about us now starting to rewrite the narrative of you do not have to be completely burnt out, completely have no life in order to be successful at whatever vocation you're doing.
We've got two nervous systems with sort of opposite roles. We've got the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system. Can you explain how those work together to keep our bodies in balance?
Yeah, so the way I explain it is that if you imagine you have these two systems, one is almost like the alarm and one is the brake. And you're either in one or the other. So the sympathetic nervous system, I don't think the name does it any justice because it's not sympathetic. But anyway, let's call it like the activation system, or also called the fight, flight, freeze. So when you're in a state of, you've detected a threat, and you are in a state of arousal activity, and your body is getting ready to either fight the threat if it deems it's able to run away from the threat, or if it feels that it's too overwhelming and it can't cope, it will literally just shut down. What's happening internally is once that alarm goes off, there's a beautifully orchestrated cascade of events that then happens. So different bits of the brain light up, but essentially the amygdala sets off the alarm. We then have the sympathetic nervous system, which is a branch of the autonomic nervous system that's activated. So you get this neurotransmitter and hormone cocktail, which means that your body, system by system by system, is mobilized, is ready in all the different systems to either fight, run, or shut down, or to freeze.
So this would have happened historically when we faced a danger to life of some sort.
Yeah, confers survival and perpetuation of the species. It's automatic, it's a non-specific response in response to a threat or a demand. Conversely, when the threat is no longer there, we then switch into the relaxation part. So this is the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system. So this is when we enter a state of rest, repair, breed, and feed. This is like the cleanup operation. And again, system by system by system, there are physiological changes, hormonal changes that happen to enable that to be the case.
And how does the vagus nerve fit into this?
So the vagus nerve is like the main superhighways, the main mediator of the parasympathetic. The vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the body, comes down from the spinal cord and innervates every single organ. It innervates our heart, our gut. It's called the wandering nerve, and it really is the main mediator of the parasympathetic. So when your vagus nerve is on and activated, it automatically stimulates that branch. We know that we are in cleanup mode, in recovery mode, in repair mode.
The sort of stress that we face when we face a threat to life doesn't happen too often. But does that same sort of stress effect get triggered, for example, when we have a row with our boss?
Of course, so anything that we perceive as a demand or a threat will activate our stress response. The brain does not know the difference between the perception of threat and actual threat. So for me, an email is neutral. For you, an email may represent not necessarily life or death, but it may be a huge thing. So many different factors will determine whether I see this as a threat or this as safety. But either way, once that system gets activated, we then enter into our stress cycle. Stress is not the issue. It's whether or not we're completing that cycle. So you go up in stress, that's fine, that's adaptive. That's good. You hit the peak, fine, and then you go down. If you're able to complete it, then there are no issues.
The trouble is, in modern life, sometimes we get stuck in a state of chronic stress, so we never go down. So small little things will keep us in that higher stress level.
100%.
That's what then really becomes an issue.
That's when chronic stress can start to deplete us. It starts to affect us on every single level, from our thinking, our mindset, our beliefs about the world. And I can take you through a whistle-stop tour of every system and show how, when you are in a state of stress and unable to recover through various factors, some are environmental, some are personal, if we're not able to complete that cycle, then we have what we call allostatic load. So this is where our body is unable to rebalance itself to get back into homeostasis. So we have this kind of wear and tear. And we know that stress is cumulative. So over time, it accumulates. And so the effects also compound over time.
I suppose we all have times in our lives where we just have to accept there's going to be a stressful period.
People often say, well, how can I manage my stress? How can I control it? How can I eliminate it? No, you don't want to. Stress is your superpower. We're both now in a state of a sympathetic activation. So I can focus on you. I'm hyper-focused. My senses are up. This is good. This is enhancing performance. But if we stay there, if we don't know the power of the parasympathetic and how to recover, that's where we can stay in activation. Obviously, how we live our lives on screens, always on the go, what we've normalized, all of these things come into play. Stress is not the bad guy here. It's how we handle our relationship to it. And that starts with awareness, and it starts with understanding what it actually is.
So two people might face the same sort of stressful events, but because their response to it may be very different, therefore one body may be much more able to cope than the other.
100%. And they've done studies where if you perceive the stressor to be negative, it will have a more detrimental effect on you. Whereas if you see stress as, okay, I'm rising to the occasion, this is an opportunity for growth, this is an opportunity for me to see what's on the other side, this is an opportunity for me to push myself, then it will have a positive impact. So we need to start to normalize it. Athletes are a great example. You know, they will stress their body in training, but they value recovery, if not equally, more, because they know it's like two sides of a coin. So you can't have one without the other. And it's when you have both that you can start to use stress as your superpower and as a guide as well.
But I think a lot of people would argue it's easier to manage physical stress because you've got an idea of what you've done to your body and then you've got recovery time, whereas you don't always know with mental stress what it's doing to your body in quite the same way.
That's true. We don't know, but we can easily find out. We just need to be open to it. So there are loads of clues that the body will leave you. And we can go through those as well. But, I always ask my patients, how's your sleep? Sleep is a really, really good guide. And I'm not saying like a few nights here, a few nights there, but generally, are you able to switch off and get into sleep? How do you see the world? And what is your general perspective on things? There are lots and lots of clues. The thing is, we haven't made the link yet. It's kind of invisible until it's not. So that's why we don't place as much value on those telltale signs.
So if you were to look at a scan of someone's brain during a threatening response which led to heightened stress, what parts of the scan would be lighting up?
Okay, so I see threats. So say we're talking to each other and a lion walks in. A threat is detected. The amygdala will then light up. So there's increased activity in this threat signaling center. So I would see that light up on a PET scan, increased activity. That will then tell the hypothalamus, which is the brain's cocktail maker, to start to make or to communicate with another area of the brain called the pituitary, who then communicates with another area of the body called the adrenal. So the hypothalamus and the pituitary also will light up. And together, they will then activate the branch of the nervous system that we spoke about, the sympathetic. But essentially, you get activation of the amygdala, that lights up. Whereas, like the CEO of the brain or the prefrontal cortex, which is more to do with emotional regulation, focus, rational thinking, executive decision-making, that quietens down. So that goes quieter. So essentially, you're getting lighting up of the limbic system, which is right, let's get ready. There's a threat, let's get ready.
And when we remain in this high stress position, what sort of health problems are we likely to come across?
So when I'm in a state of threat, what do I need? I need to get ready to run. So my blood pressure will go up. My heart rate will go up. I will start breathing differently. I'm trying to get more oxygen in my system. So my respiratory rate will go up. I'm breathing faster and more shallow. And the blood is then shunted away from the areas that I deem that are not a priority. So my gut and my reproductive system. And the blood is now shunted to my heart and to my muscles because I'm getting ready to move. So blood pressure goes up, heart rate goes up, my breathing changes. My muscles tense up because I'm getting ready. I also need energy to run. So my sugar stores are released. So any glycogen, any sugar stores that were stored in my liver get released. I've downregulated the systems I don't need right now. My immune system, this is an interesting one. In the very short term, cortisol is actually anti-inflammatory. It reduces inflammation and it's almost a painkiller as well.
Hence why we have cortisol injections.
Exactly. Absolutely. So in the short term, my immune system is actually kind of getting ready for that. So that's going to be great in that short term. But if I persist in stress, my blood pressure is up. Fine for a day or two, but what happens after a year, a decade? Hypertension. What happens if I'm not breathing right? Respiratory issues. What happens if my blood sugar is all over the place? Metabolic conditions, diabetes. What happens if my immune system is dysregulated? Autoimmunity, cancer. My hormones are out of whack, thyroid issues, metabolic issues. My gut has been downregulated. My reproductive system has been downregulated. Hormone issues in women, menstrual irregularities, reduction in fertility, in men, reduction in libido, etc. And I'm very, very tense. So my muscles aren't able to relax. My posture changes and I might get musculoskeletal issues. So from that stress cycle and from that initial response that's meant to protect us and have us adapt to that scenario, it goes from helpful and saving my life to the enemy, where it's contributing to everything. And we haven't even spoken about how is my mindset. Well, if I see a threat, Liz, I'm going to think, oh my God, I'm going to die. Wake up, Safia. Like, come on, let's go. This is very, very serious. So I tend to be more negative, more catastrophic, and more focused. And I'm thinking of the worst possible case scenario.
Because I think you've just about listed every disease it's possible for the human body to get.
Yeah, but also I see it as a real opportunity as well.
So I think we all recognise on some level that relaxing practice and things like meditation are helpful. But I was really intrigued about one paper that you mentioned that suggested the relaxation response can actually change our gene expression.
Yes, this really was the one moment that I think catalyzed my journey into this work. This is when I was sold.
Well, it's what made me want to interview you, actually, because I probably have a slight prejudice against what might be seen as slight woo-woo stuff.
Yes.
Not that I don't think meditation is important, of course I do. But when I saw this, I thought, that's really interesting.
And I had exactly the same reaction because I was like, of course it's great to meditate. Of course it's great to sleep. But when I saw this study, they looked at gene expression. If you see your genes as light switches, what we know now through epigenetics is your environment will dictate if that gene is switched on or off. So you may have the gene for oxidative stress, you may have the gene for breast cancer. Your environment will then dictate if it's on or off. So your physiological environment, the biochemical environment, the hormonal environment, etc., etc. This study showed that after 8 weeks of regular meditation, they saw a reduction in the gene expression of those genes that were related to oxidative stress. So basically, you meditate, you are switching off oxidative stress genes.
What sort of meditation were they doing?
I think it was a focused attention meditation. It was 40 minutes twice a day. They had 3 groups. They had seasoned meditators that were regular practitioners. They had new and they had a control group. That wasn't the only finding, but they saw a reduction in oxidative stress.
Can you explain what focused idea meditation is?
So there are lots and lots of different types of meditation. So you can be focused on, okay, I'm just going to breathe out and breathe in, or I'm going to focus on counting up to 5 and then coming back down to 0, or I'm going to focus on a sentence. So this is, I choose to bring my focus to one point. The mind is going to wander, I'm going to bring it back. So it's a kind of, I am choosing and overriding my impulses to go and do this and do this. So it's not about being able to really focus the whole time. It's the process of coming back to that single point focus. And there are lots of different types of meditation, of course. And we have the body of evidence. The research and the scans show that when we meditate, the amygdala that we previously spoke about becomes less reactive. So instead of it being an alarm blaring, oh my God, it's a lot quieter. The prefrontal cortex gets bigger or more concentrated, if you will. And then we see like the hippocampus, which is our area of the brain that is involved in memory and learning and consolidation of learning, increases.
Well, one thing I notice actually when I'm really stressed, for example, when you're making a TV program and you're really working towards a deadline, that can be really stressful and you've got to deliver it in time. I used to find that my short-term memory was really badly affected. And I've got a pretty photographic memory normally. So I really noticed the difference.
Super interesting. Yeah. And I guess you would ask yourself then, how important is that short-term memory there? Because you were focused on deadline. I need to get this done. So everything else kind of goes out the window. But if you're clever about it and strategic, you think, right, this is going to be a high stress. I'm up. So let me make sure that I'm able to prime myself and recover well. So I am super stressed. I am under threat or a deadline. Great, because I want to be hyper-focused. I want to be tunnel vision and all the rest of it. Let me not make it worse for myself and not sleep. And then you may argue, well, actually, Safia, when I'm super stressed, I find it difficult to switch off. So it's then looking at what is that? Because if I'm in a stress state, what ideally I would like is the ability of my prefrontal cortex to kind of come in and say a thing, give me a little perspective and keep me grounded. So it doesn't stop me from going up into stress, but it gives me that cognitive flexibility.
I was going to say, I think for me, if it's moderate stress, I'm probably more effective at bringing it down. But if I'm really stressed, I think that's much harder.
Yeah, of course, because you're in it and you get consumed by it. So we need to have our litmus test. And personally, for me, I needed to hit my threshold. I'm not necessarily listening when people are like, oh, calm down, relax, da, da, da. I need to hit that so that I know for myself, okay, this is your limit. And hopefully it doesn't come with a diagnosis or something that's life-altering. But once we hit that limit, then for you, it's about knowing, okay, you can go 2 nights a week with poor sleep, but that's it. So I have these kind of rules for myself whereby an intervention is then made, which means sacrifice. It means saying no, or it means saying yes. But fundamentally, I know that cost, I'm not willing to pay it anymore. That price, I'm not willing to pay it anymore.
Well, I always think telling somebody to calm down, 2 of the most useless words in the English language.
Oh, it's the worst thing you can do. Because we're limbic.
Yeah.
I always say, it's like you're in airplane mode and trying to make a call. It's not happening. If anybody takes anything from this, it's use your neuroscience. Don't go against your biology because you will lose. You might not lose in the short term, but in the long term, you will lose. So work with it and not against it.
Now, the interesting thing about this study that we were looking at and how meditation changed gene expression, obviously, when you're doing a study like this, you can't look at all genes. You've got to select the genes you look at. So it's extremely likely, presumably, there will be other genes that are also altered by this.
Yes, and we know across multiple variables and parameters that it improves. And you can liken meditation to some of the outcomes we get with sleep. But we know across the board, it improves neuroplasticity. So the ability for your brain to change in response to its environment. It improves learning and consolidation. It actually changes your brain, reduces blood pressure, increases feelings of well-being, improves concentration, focus, decision-making, reduces reactivity. I mean, the list is endless.
Whereas if I break my arm, I think, well, obviously I've got to go to A&E. But if I think, oh, I've been chronically stressed, I won't see it as so important, although long term it might have equally detrimental effects on my life.
Yes. And this is where we start to raise the awareness. Did you know? And then start to question the narratives around why are we conditioned to belittle stress and belittle sleep? Why is it, like in my case, why is it that burnout is a badge of honor? Why is it celebrated?
Well, I suppose the other question is, given all of these health problems that stress can cause, which is basically every disease system in the body, that meditation appears to actually change gene expression. Why isn't medicine more interested in this?
I don't know, because it involves more time, perhaps. I think the tide is changing. I think now people are more empowered and are taking matters into their own hands. Medicine likes objective measures. We have the pharmaceutical industry. We have protocols. We have all of these things which are easier to prove.
I appreciate medicine likes objective measures, which is why I thought the study showing gene expression was quite interesting, because that's a biological change.
Yeah, but it's definitely easier to give somebody a prescription than to rely on behavior change. But this is why it's part of my practice, because I feel like if we're hitting our foundations, then we will automatically reduce the burden of disease. But that takes time. But the research and the evidence is there.
So when somebody comes in to see you as a new patient, what's the first thing you do when you're looking to assess their stress levels and how they cope with it, which, as you say, is equally important?
Yeah, so there's a combination of the history. So I speak to them and I ask them how they're doing. I like to see it in terms of physiological alignment. So are there any clues? So once I've spoken to them, are there any clues in the history? Are they sleeping okay? Are they able to switch off? Are they aligned? How is their lifestyle? Are there any signs of sugar or metabolic issues? Also, I look at the objective measures. So obviously blood pressure, heart rate variability, respiratory rate, and a full examination. And then we have blood tests and blood markers just to see, is there any inflammation in the body, any hormones imbalance, etc. So it's a multi-pronged approach, but often people know when things aren't quite right. It's a question of, okay, what's the lowest hanging fruit? Where can I start? But before all of that, Liz, it's, what do I believe about stress? Do I believe that, oh, this is just the way it is? Or I have no choice? I go there because it's what we believe about something that then dictates if we are then going to prioritize it and value it. It's really going with what is the tiniest thing I can start doing and really then being strategic about it. So that's why I always tend to start with sleep.
Well, interesting. One of the things I've started doing is, because I did a podcast a few weeks back about heart rate variability, the guest I interviewed was talking about Garmin watches being wearables which will assess your stress level 24 hours a day. And actually, I found that quite a useful indicator, because you don't always know the things that are making you stressed. That's what I found quite interesting. So, for example, when I thought I was just fiddling about on my mobile phone in a low stress mode, that's actually much more high stress than, say, me reading a book. Because obviously there's some stuff that I know is going to make me stressed. It was quite revealing for me in the stuff that I didn't think made me stressed, but actually did.
They can be super useful for people, especially to increase that awareness and to start to kind of connect the dots a little bit for people. And it's also to look at, well, actually, it's not just about stress. Always have to remember the other side of the equation. Heart rate variability is how adaptable, how flexible is your heart rate. When it goes up, does it come back down? That's the crux of it. It's not the presence of stress in your life, Liz. It's, are you able to truly recover?
Well, interesting, doing this, I've been able to increase my heart rate variability.
Yeah.
Just through doing a bit of breathing, but also realizing when I was getting stressed, taking a break. And I think my heart rate variability has probably gone up, I don't know, 20%.
That's amazing. Well done. And it also shows you that you don't need to do much. It's not a question of, okay, I need to start now, doing an hour of breath work, an hour of meditation. It's tiny, simple interventions throughout the day and really starting to just take out stuff that we know We used to think, oh, I'm relaxing. No, you're not. You're numbing out.
So for someone who's never used any techniques to control their stress, where would you start for someone who's doing this for the first time?
I would ask that person what they feel drawn to, because you're more likely to do something that you're interested in and that you understand. So I always give the science behind something. I would always start with the tiniest things. So in my consultations, I always show people how to breathe. So I will show them a diaphragmatic breath, a physiological sigh. So things that you can feel instantaneously.
Can you break those down for me? What do those look like?
A physiological sigh is when, and we can do it together now if you want.
Okay, yep, ready?
So deep breath in through your nose. So we'll go up to 4 and then just pause at the top for 2 to 3 seconds. And then we're going to exhale with an open mouth and giving out a big sigh. Allowing the exhale to be longer than the inhale. So that will trigger our vagus nerve. Because we're taking a deep breath, we're also moving the diaphragm. And if we can do that 3 to 5 times, it will reduce our heart rate. So this is a great thing to do in your meeting. If you just want a little buffer, hold at the top. And when holding, making sure to relax your body. So open and then exhaling a loud sigh. The louder, the better.
Why are we exhaling through the mouth and not the nose?
I think it's just more effective, and then you're able to activate your vocal cords. Things like humming, singing, they're really good at activating vagal tone as well. I find the physiological sigh a very underutilized technique, and we do it without knowing. You know, like if you've had a difficult phone call and you come off, it's like a release, right?
But you're suggesting we would do this sort of 3 or 5 times in a row, several times a day?
Several times a day. You can even, if you're on Zoom meetings all day, start the meeting off like that. Okay, everybody, let's just get into the zone, 3 or 5 breaths. And so we normalize that. We normalize stretching, things like that. The hardest hitter in terms of recovery and in terms of not needing to do much is sleep. So I would always then go there. What is your morning routine? We all have one. What is your evening routine? We all have one. How is your sleep? And really starting like micro steps in starting to optimize that. Because when we sleep, we automatically buffer, we automatically switch on certain genes that clean up, we automatically regulate our blood sugar, we automatically clean up any toxins, etc. We automatically consolidate memories, enhance learning. So I always tend to, with my patients, start with the breath and start with sleep. But I always ask them, look, what would you find the easiest thing to do?
I had somebody who was a sleep expert on the podcast, and he said one of his big concerns was sleep anxiety. People are told that it's really, really important to sleep well. Therefore, they get more anxious and end up actually sleeping worse.
Yeah. So it's really looking at the beliefs around sleep and really seeing it as a learnt behavior. When babies are small, we talk about sleep training. Then we're untrained on how to sleep. You need to work late. We're then given screens. And, we're not switching off now. It's not like you leave the office and you have no more Wi-Fi signal. And then we're told, oh my God, you're going to die if you don't sleep well. So then it's like panic. So our limbic system flooded with this adrenaline and cortisol. Then obviously we can't sleep. So I would go slow. This is not a race. Remember, stress is cumulative, but so is recovery. Even if you just aim to optimize my sleep environment, I'm going to make sure my bed is only for sleep so that I'm not lying in bed for hours on end or working in my bed. So the associations become very, very clear. I'm going to make sure the temperature is good. I'm going to make sure I leave my phone outside. Just tiny things without hanging too much on, I have to sleep perfectly for 7 to 9 hours, otherwise XYZ. I always say one tiny thing. If you want to go big, you start tiny. So tiny little things incrementally, because then that person will notice, oh, you know what? Like I'll share one thing with you, Liz. I was sold on meditation, but I really had trouble incorporating it into my daily life until I thought, okay, look, you're aiming for 45 minutes. That's clearly not doable for you right now. Just do 10 minutes. And Liz, the days I did 10 minutes of meditation, especially like day 3, instead of a medical report taking me an hour and a half, 2 hours, needing like 100 cups of tea, 500 chats with my PA, I did it in 45 minutes. And it was focused and I enjoyed it. 10 minutes of your day to focus your mind. I wasn't necessarily feeling calm, but I was like in that try focus, no, it goes, bring it back. Saved me 45 minutes.
I read all this stuff about meditation. I think this would obviously be a really good thing to do, but I'm somebody that finds it quite difficult to switch off. So before I go to sleep, I always read, and I find that actually is really effective. But I do find whenever I've tried to do meditation, my mind just wanders all over the place.
That's what it's meant to do.
Things that might make me stressed rather than things that might make me relaxed.
So in some people, if you are very heightened, meditation where it's very silent can be quite jarring. So in those cases, what I would say is, look, perhaps for you, it would look like a mindful walk. It has to be more active. There are loads of different ways to get to the same destination, which is essentially presence. It's essentially being in the moment and being the master versus the slave of, this and that, and, being taken away. It's like, no, I dictate. So if you find it too jarring, first of all, it's meant to be, especially at the beginning. So normalizing the expectation, you're not going to levitate and feel totally blissful. That's number one. But let's just say, for you, it could be walking the dog and just focusing on the leaves today or on the trees, no phones. For you, it could be a repetitive cycling, walking, something like that.
When I go for a walk in the morning now, which I always do, I always used to listen to a podcast, and I've stopped doing that now. I remember interviewing somebody before who said, if you're listening to a podcast, that's an extra stimulus.
Yeah. If you can just tune into your senses. So what do I see? And really involve yourself in it. What do I see? What can I taste? What do I smell? What do I feel? Right? And just go into that and really, really absorb yourself in it. So you can see the thoughts, but then you're able to say, okay, not now, later. That process is called metacognition, when I can see my thoughts, but I'm not my thoughts, as opposed to just being swept away in a spiral of thinking. So people often think I should think nothing. No. You can see your thoughts, but like you see the clouds in the sky, and they're just doing their thing. You're not clinging on to them. Start there, but really it's about consistency, because we are building. But meditation can have lots and lots of different forms, and there are hundreds of different types of meditation. The main thing is to be able to choose where you place your attention. That's really what it is. In a society where we have fractured attention and where we are here and there and dopamine and here and this and, everywhere. If I'm able to choose where I place my focus, which is a dose-dependent thing, it comes with practice.
And you do need to do it every day.
You do when you can. Start with, because I think when we place these expectations on ourselves, it's like, I can't. It's too much of a jump for the brain. So I will say, okay, look, let's just do 1 minute. Like when you're brushing your teeth, brush your teeth, like be in it. When you're having a shower, do some breath. This is why I love breath work, because with breath work, it tends to be more dynamic process and it's more engaged, and it's very good at dropping you down into those states.
You're not having to just sort of make your mind think of, a sea or something. You can focus on that.
Yeah.
Now, you talked about the sigh. Is there other sort of simple breath work that we can do as well?
Oh, lots of techniques. If you think about our stress response, and remember when I said the breath becomes more rapid and shallow, the other thing that we do when we are in threat, especially when we're kids, is we learn, I can't control the world around me. It feels too overwhelming and too much. But what I can control is my breath. So I will hold my breath as a protection, because I'm making myself smaller, I'm constricting, I'm tensing. But also then we realize I can at least control that. But then what that leads to is we then forget how to breathe. So instead of a diaphragmatic breath, whereby when I'm inhaling, my lower belly is expanding and then coming back down when I exhale, we just basically are breathing in a very shallow way, which means we're not optimizing gas exchange and it's very tense and it's up here. So the first thing I would say is, before you get out of bed, one hand on your chest, one hand on the abdomen, and just take a few breaths. That's it. It takes 2 seconds. A few breaths where when you're inhaling, you're allowing the lower belly to rise and then release. So it's a passive relaxation. So doing that, start of the day and at the end of the day. We then also have some strategies we can use throughout the day. So box breathing is another very easy one, especially if we're all on our screens, where you're breathing in for a count of 4, you hold for a count of 4, you exhale for a count of 4, and you hold again for a count of 4. And you can vary that up. But some method of, right, I am now the master of this. Well, and if we do this every single day, so setting an alarm every time I have a Zoom meeting, every time I open my door to go and get a patient, I will take some mindful breaths. I will do it with my patients so that we're both breathing. And you'll naturally see things open up. We then become more relaxed. So I would say whoever is listening is just look at your posture right now. Just look at it now. Are you open? Are you tense? Are you hunched? How are you breathing right now? Don't change anything. Take a few breaths and tell me. Do you feel your lower abdomen, or is it predominantly up in your chest? How does it actually feel to breathe? Because this is something we do all the time, right? We are breathing all the time.
We just take it for granted and just assume that we're doing it okay.
Of course. So let's just start now bringing our awareness into it. The breath that you're going to take anyway, do it with intention, and that will change a lot for you. Almost challenge everybody. Just take 5 physiological sighs right now and see how you feel afterwards. Especially if you combine that with being outside, if you combine it with being with someone that you like. We focus so much on the stress, but how about we buffer our stress by strengthening our parasympathetic? So the stress we once deemed to be overwhelming is now, it's challenging, but it's not going to break me.
So there's some sort of cognitive behavioral work going on as well.
Somatic work. We can talk about it, but I would say let's use our body because our body knows exactly what to do.
When you were talking earlier, it's not so much about stress, it's how we respond to it.
Yeah.
And I wondered if that was also about how we think about it.
Certainly.
Which would be something cognitive.
Yeah. So we need to understand it. So now we need to know, okay, it's a cycle. Stress is not bad, but essentially we need to reframe what actually stress is. How can it help me? When does it become damaging? What are the signs of chronic stress? Not to then be completely anxiety-ridden because of it, but no, just to be like, oh, okay, that's a sign that I've pushed it a little bit more, that I've pushed it a little bit too much. We can be in states of stress that are actually fine for us, but the problem arises from the lack of recovery. So for a lot of my patients, I start with the parasympathetic because then the external stressors aren't so much because we've worked on the internal state.
Obviously, you work in the private sector, but a lot of what you're talking about, these are cheap, relatively simple things people could do. So it seems to me there's potentially a role for this in the NHS too.
100%. And even when I was in the NHS, this was a cornerstone of my consultation because everything links back to the brain and the neuroscience. It's just that I didn't have as much time to go into depth. But fundamentally, there is a lot of information out there. Go to a reliable source and learn a little and then start to embed. Don't try to do everything at once, but just start with the hardest hitters and start very small. There is a cumulative improvement and beneficial effect. And the beauty is, yes, it's a domino effect in terms of all the systems being affected, But it's another domino effect in all the systems being improved.
And are there free resources you can recommend?
Yeah, so on my website, rqwellness.com, the NHS website will have some information, but I would just kind of go to practical tools. But ask yourself if you believe it first. So go with what you relate to.
And how do you think adopting this approach has changed your life?
I just feel, as a doctor, I feel a lot more aligned and more authentic, and I feel like I can give a lot more because my cup is full. I feel like I have more impact. I don't know, but I feel like the care I give is a lot more holistic. I see the person as a whole, as opposed to a cardiovascular system, a gut, a hormonal system. And I feel like I'm really now in true health. I see the system as one. So right down to your values, what you believe, to the social determinants of health, everything is impacted. So I feel like now I can't burn out because I love it and I'm living it. So it feels a lot more aligned to me, and I absolutely love it.
Well, Safia, thank you so much for talking today. Clearly a few things there for me to work on too. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Many thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the latest episode of the podcast. It will now be taking a short break and we'll be back on the 15th of April, 2025. If you are able to leave a review on Apple or Spotify, I'd be really grateful. It really makes a difference. Bye for now.